Hi, I'm Helena.
And I'm Lydia.
Hello again and welcome to another Coronavirus and MS podcast. We found after the first one that we did that we had more to say about this.
Yeah, because the advice around everything is just constantly changing all the time. It's hard to keep up.
Right. And some bits that was in our previous podcast was probably out of date by now. For example, when I spoke to Emily in the last one, she was still doing the school run to get her kids. And obviously the schools are all shut now.
Yeah, that's right. And with this sort of ever-changing advice and news flying around, we thought we would get some information together for you on sessions that we get here at the MS Trust about the coronavirus.
So we've been getting an awful lot of questions with regards to COVID-19 or the coronavirus to the MS Trust, both in our social media and people calling and emailing. And we've decided to try and do this little Q&A. So we've gathered together some questions that people couldn't find an answer for. And we are going to now speak to Claire from the Information and Engagement team, who also works in the inquiry service, so answers a lot of these calls and questions on a day-to-day basis. It's been very busy in the inquiry service, hasn't it, Claire?
It's been incredibly busy. We've seen a massive increase in calls and emails coming through to us. And a lot of these are people who are, most of them are people who are very worried about the COVID-19 outbreak and wonder what it means for them.
So let's move on to the Q&A then. So we have a few questions for you, Claire.
Okay.
And I'll read them off. I have got MS and I take an immune suppressing drug, but I haven't got the letter from the NHS telling me to self-isolate. Why is that?
Okay, so the NHS has sent out letters to the people it thinks are extremely vulnerable to the effects of COVID-19, advising them to shield themselves, basically completely self-isolate as far as they can to really reduce the risk of them getting the infection at all, because the government thinks that these are the people which are most likely to have problems. Now, in terms of MS, the only people that really applies to are people who already have severe respiratory problems, who maybe have problems breathing or clearing their lungs, and people on some of the strongest immune suppressing drugs now, or those people who have recently had a stem cell transplant. Now, there's a lot of drugs used in MS which do have an effect on the immune system, but the NHS has so far only mentioned Lemtrada, alemtuzumab, and cladribine, otherwise known as Mavenclad, and really only if you've had those in the last 6 months or so. They have a really big effect on the white blood cells, which are what your body uses to mop up infections. And if you've had those quite recently, then your immune systems will be particularly low. So those are the people that the NHS has sent letters to. Although we know it's not just, we know there are some people out there who have had those drugs who haven't had those letters, and they should perhaps get in touch with their GP and see if that's the case, that if they've been missed out or something, and just check. But also there's people on other drugs like fingolimod, Gilenya, or Ocrevus, ocrelizumab, who are concerned as well, because they know that their drugs have quite a strong effect on the immune system, but they haven't been given this 12-week isolation advice. And the issue is, I think, partly because some people on these drugs are getting the letters and some aren't, and people are quite confused. Are the criteria being applied evenly by every GP practice in the country? It's a bit hard to tell. I think everyone in the NHS is working really hard to identify people who might be at risk and give them appropriate advice. But in the meantime, I think it's really sensible for people who know they are taking an immune suppressing drug to be really careful. Mm. If you've had a letter from the NHS saying you need to self-isolate or shield, then do so. But if you're concerned, even if you haven't had a letter, it doesn't mean that you're not vulnerable, if you see what I mean. Mm. So yeah. I think the thing is to be careful. Be really careful. It could, getting this virus could hit you hard. If you find that any little infection, any bug you get tends to make your MS symptoms flare up, it could trigger your symptoms to worsen, and a bad infection could even trigger, a full-blown relapse for somebody. So yeah, I think the advice is, if you haven't had a letter but you think you're vulnerable, then treat yourself as vulnerable.
Yeah.
If that, speak to your GP perhaps about whether, if there's any issues around work employment and your managers need to see, you need to understand exactly what's happening there. I think it's unrealistic in this current climate to expect doctors to be writing sick notes. The government guidance is that businesses need to be a lot more flexible about sick notes. And also, if you have got symptoms that might be COVID-19, the coronavirus, there is a self sick note that you can download from the government website as well, that you can use to show your employees as well.
And speaking of the government website, there is also that list for the extremely vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. That spells it right out. The people cancers or suppressing drugs and everything else. And that's on the government website is really clear. And that's the guidance that we've been following all along.
So here's another question. I am self-isolating and I live alone, but what should I do about my shopping?
Well, it must be really scary. I mean, self-isolating is not trivial.
No.
Stay inside. Don't leave the house at all. Don't go to any gatherings. Do everything online by phone. We know that there have been people who have trouble setting up online deliveries. I know the supermarkets have been overwhelmed with people wanting online shopping deliveries, and they've had big delay. There are community groups nearly all over the country where vulnerable people have been identified and can get people getting food to them. So joining a group on Facebook or something like that can help. Calling your GP and putting yourself on that list of vulnerable people, making sure that people know. So if you don't have support, if you don't have neighbours, family members, friends that can do things for you, making sure that you're put on a list. And there is a list, again, on the government website. You can register for that extra support.
And I've read somewhere that list is supposed to eventually be shared with the supermarkets and things as well. So
I think these are really great plans, but I think we don't want, and it's probably a good idea, but we don't want to assume that everywhere in the country it's rolled out really smoothly.
No.
We need to make sure that the people in our communities are looked after and that we've found them and make sure that everyone's all right.
And online there's definitely a lot of information to get. I guess it is just a tricky thing for these people who might not be online. But like you said,
it's exactly. Imagine. I know, and I'm an online dweller as much as anyone else these days. But I can't imagine how this would have gone down. Even 20 years ago, we didn't have Facebook groups, and not very many people at all had internet access. At least many people do have internet access. You sometimes forget that there are plenty of people who don't have smartphones, who don't have a PC or a laptop or a tablet in the house, and they are reliant entirely on the phone and letters and things to communicate with the outside world if they're not able to get out themselves.
yes.
So this is where I think a phone, if you find yourself in that position, then a phone call to your GP is probably the best place.
Let's move on to the next question. It's again about the letter. I've got a letter from the NHS saying that I am extremely vulnerable because of my Lemtrada infusion, but my husband works in a hospital. What do we do? He has to go to work.
This is a really difficult thing, isn't it? Because any household could have people who are vulnerable, people who are very vulnerable, and people who are key workers and have to go out to work. And how do you keep everybody safe? I know that people working in hospitals in the NHS have been really concerned about that. We know that there's doctors and nurses who are not able to go to work because somebody in their family has got COVID symptoms. So, I think people are having to work these things out for themselves as far as they can. And one thing that's going to be quite tricky for people, but if they feel they need to do that, then they're going to have to. If you've got somebody who is going out to work, they need to be really careful about social distancing, washing their hands, and all the rest of it. I appreciate that if they're working in a hospital, they might feel that they're more likely to come into contact with the virus than other people, so they need to be really, really careful. They also need to tell their management, their employers, that they've got somebody vulnerable at home, and maybe they can be deployed to less risky areas than others. But there will be some places where people absolutely are needed, and they don't want to stop doing their vital work in the risky places. And so, do they have to kind of isolate from each other, socially distance from each other in the home? Make sure you're washing down door handles and things regularly. Make sure you're using different towels, and sleeping in different beds if that's what it takes for the time being. It's something that I think each individual family is going to have to work out for themselves, though, and it's very difficult to do anything more than say, well, this is the guidance. Yeah, you have to interpret it. I know some families have decided to live apart for the duration, where they've got a key worker coming in and out frequently, and there might be a very vulnerable person who needs protection as well. So working out, but then not everyone has that luxury. I'll just move out. I know that there are hospital accommodations are being found for people who do need to carry on working, but they have vulnerable people at home in some hospitals, but I don't know.
Oh, and I mean, I've definitely seen a lot of people doing both the sort of living apart or the trying to distance themselves in the house. But like you say, it's not always easy, is it? Because especially if you live in a flat share or you live in a small house.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is that largely COVID-19 is mild to moderate for most people that get it. It is easy to get really, really worried about it, and particularly if you think that if you did get it, you might be more likely to get more severe illness. But we're still talking about quite small numbers in this country, and I think it's really important to keep balance. Be really careful, but there's no saying that any particular interaction is going to be a problem. I don't know how to move on really without that kind of attitude. Otherwise, we'll just be scared in our houses.
That's it. And the NHS has been doing, and not just the NHS, but all the other key workers as well, have been doing absolutely amazing jobs. So we should feel inspired.
This is it. Largely, we're hearing wonderful stories. Supermarket workers and bin men and police officers and fire officers and all sorts of things. All sorts of roles that we didn't really see as key roles. You realise that without the supermarket being full, without people delivering and driving and getting that all to people, society breaks down pretty quickly. So whatever that key role is, it really is key, and we're so grateful for people that are still doing them.
So here's a question about hospital appointments or MS appointments. I was supposed to have a routine blood test next week. Should I go ahead with it?
Okay. If you've been told that the appointment is still going ahead and you haven't had a cancellation letter, then as long as you're well, you're not suffering any COVID-19 symptoms yourself, or nobody in your family is, then you can go ahead. If you'd rather not, then do call and change the appointment or cancel. I think it's quite likely that if it's not an important appointment, if it is just a routine thing, then you might find that it gets postponed in any case. So, I would keep in touch with the service and make sure that you know what's going on there. It's quite likely that some of the routine monitoring appointments might be delayed for a few weeks or months, and also that you might find that face-to-face appointments get replaced with phone appointments. Now, obviously, you can't do a phone appointment to do a blood test, but you might find that you're doing it in a different place to normal. Maybe they'll direct you to a clinic that's not in the hospital, so that you're not necessarily putting yourself at the same risk. So, get in touch with the service and see. But unless you've had a cancellation, then you should generally attend.
And if you're having sort of, normal symptoms, but if you're having symptoms of MS that you are worried about, you can still get in touch with your MS nurse, can't you?
Absolutely. You should still try and get in touch with your MS nurse and your MS service at the times you normally would do. If you think you're having a relapse, if something has changed about your MS, if you've noticed symptoms which are new or much worse. I think it is reasonable in the current climate to expect to not have just regular meetups, your regular 6-month chat. because the nurses will be under particular pressure. So, and they'll want to focus on people who are really, really struggling and really need their help right now. But I would expect that all these routine appointments, annual reviews, checkups and things like that will get put back into the calendar after we're through the outbreak. But right now, a lot of specialist medical staff are being diverted from their MS services onto general wards and intensive care wards and getting trained to support support people with coronavirus. But this is a temporary thing, and we really hope to see a return to normality pretty soon.
Yeah. So while we're waiting, we will have to be a bit more flexible, I guess.
I think so. Just be a little bit patient. But no, don't stop calling your MS service if you think something is wrong, though. There will still be somebody to monitor that line. There will be somebody that can get back to you. It might take longer, that's all.
And that same goes for the MS Trust. We're still here as well if people have questions. So
absolutely, there's more than ever of us are busy on the inquiry line. We're checking our phone line. We've moved to working from home, so our phone line is going directly to voicemail. But we're checking it every half hour and calling people back as quickly as we can. If you can email instead of phone, then that's easier because your query will come straight through to us and we can get straight on with it. But we're keeping to our very high standards and making sure that we're getting back to people within the day or the next day if we can. And and we're getting through a lot of hearing from a lot of people, and we're really glad to be able to do so.
And tell us our email address in case people want to get in touch.
So if you want to get in touch with us, use the ask@mstrust.org.uk email address, and that comes straight through to the information team, and a member of the information team will get straight back to you.
Excellent. All right, I got the last question now, and this is something that's been talked about in the news quite a lot very recently. Should I be wearing a mask?
It's interesting, isn't it? So in some countries, it's much more normal to wear a mask than in Britain. It's a kind of a politeness thing, I think, in the Far East, that if you feel a bit like you've got a bit of a cold or sniffle, then you wear a mask because it would be polite not to infect other people. And I have to say, travelling on the tube sometimes in London, I kind of feel that would be a good thing. It's worse than being in a crowded carriage when somebody's snuffling and coughing at the end of it. However, it's not something we tend to do in Britain, so it does feel a bit weird. I can understand why people are wondering, though, if this is something that they should be doing, particularly given all the hoo-ha about the personal protective equipment for nurses and doctors in hospitals. The World Health Organization guidance is being looked at again at the moment, so this might be out of date by the time you hear it. But at the moment, the guidance is that you don't need to wear a mask if you are healthy. It won't do anything particular to stop. It won't reduce your risk of infection very much. However, if you do have symptoms, then wearing a mask will help protect other people from you. And if you are caring for people who have symptoms, then you could wear a mask as well. So that basically means that nurses and doctors and people caring for coronavirus patients or people who are isolating at home with symptoms could consider wearing a mask. In general, we think that this virus is spread through droplets. But there is the 2 meters distancing is because those droplets would fall to the ground before they reached you. But it's always the case that there's tiny, tiny minimal risks of these droplets going further. And there are some scientists who are looking at whether it is whether the virus can spread further than that 2 meter thing. But it's at the moment, we don't think that there is a general guidance for everybody to be wearing a mask because it probably wouldn't help because most people wouldn't really use them correctly. You need a certain amount of, some basic training to understand how to use it properly and really protect yourself. So probably best not to worry because it will probably do more harm than good. You'd be forever fiddling with it or, trying to lift it up to drink your coffee, but, it wouldn't be helpful at all.
And as you said, advice changes all the time. So by the time we're recording this is what we've...
That's what we've... I did just check the World Health Organization guidance before we spoke just now. And, that is still the case. But there are some news reports in the media at the moment saying that they are having another look at that.
Yeah.
But given that it's they're pretty hard to come by, I wouldn't worry overly about it. If you're caring for somebody who's got symptoms, or you have symptoms yourself, then wearing a mask might be a good idea. But if you are healthy and then there's no need to worry.
And as advice changes all the time, we keep on updating our information on our website as well constantly. So it's always good to go and check for the most recent advice when it comes to anything like self-isolation or medication or anything.
Absolutely. We're keeping the A to Z on coronavirus COVID-19 up to date on the MS Trust website. And when we do make an update, we're dating those updates as well. So you'll see at the top of the page exactly what we've added on what day. So you'll be able to see that exactly how up to date it is. So if you've heard something that's breaking news, but it hasn't quite made it to our website yet, you'll be able to see where we are in that news cycle. Because we're only human and we're going as fast as we can, but we don't want to put up unsubstantiated claims. We want to research the facts and make sure that we're giving really reliable information, because that's what's important to help people with MS make informed decisions.
And that's what we worry about, because there is a lot of strange information flying about. So that's why it's extra important to always fact check.
It really is, and making sure of your sources for information is really, really, really key, particularly in these times when there is so much fake news flying around.
Well, thank you so much, Claire, for talking to us. This has been really useful. If people have a question which wasn't covered in this Q&A, they can get in touch with us when we'll try and respond. I mean, we don't always know the answer, but we will always have a go at trying to find an answer, right?
Absolutely. And I think bad information is worse than no information. So we will say, if we don't know the answer, we will say. And if we think we're not the right people to answer the question, then we will put you in touch with someone that is.
Brilliant. So get in touch if you feel that you have a question. You can email or call us, or there's lots of social media channels that we're on. So go and find us. Our next guest on our Corona podcast is Carla King. We've been in touch with Carla for a few years now. She is an active member of our MS Trust Facebook group, and she writes a fantastic blog called My MS Bully and Me. And we've chatted to Carla about other things in the past as well, and she's written articles for us in Open Door. Hi, Carla. How are you?
Hi, Helena. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really well today. Thank you.
How are you coping with this whole lockdown? I don't know, it's not proper lockdown, is it? But no. I like to call it lockdown situation.
So I think I'm coping quite well, actually. So I've done things like I've turned more to the blogging, and I've actually got quite a few unpublished posts, as they're mainly for me. I think... So I've actually, I think like many MSs, I've spent a lot of time at home, actually. So this is not an unusual experience for me.
Yeah.
Perhaps the one thing that is unusual is obviously before I had even if it was difficult, I still had the option to go out. Now I don't. I've chosen to self-isolate. But from the point of view of having been at home for long periods of time in the last year, I think now my home has been invaded by my own family, 24/7. And that's quite hard sometimes, because having to now I find myself having to be more vocal about what I need and when. Because I think it's really important that we each have our own space, even though we have a small place, like, again, many MSs, we have our own space and that we have our own time to ourselves. And I think also social media, as sometimes, although I have to mute certain aspects of social media and certain, I have to sort of be quite limited in my time with it sometimes. It can also be quite a lifeline. So, things like WhatsApp and Zoom and all these other things that have opened up recently in a way that I hadn't expected, I think are really great ways to connect with people when you can't see them. So my own family, for example, who are, in their 70s, never seen WhatsApp in their lives, they're now chatting with, and video chatting with my children, my son rather. So, it's kind of, I think we've all got a lot of change coming up quite fast. And one of the ways to deal with it, I deal with it anyway, is through fun and humour, because, you know, I think it's sometimes quite difficult to keep up with lots of change as it has been over the last few weeks. And I know that we're all having to sacrifice something, but I think a little bit of mischief goes a long way. And I think, you know, to kind of connect with other people is supremely, more important than ever, I think, now, when you can't see them face to face. And I think we're all just finding new ways to do that. I think the key thing that I'm now noticing is sometimes I get a little bit overwhelmed by all the information coming my way now, just suddenly out of nowhere. There have been lots of kind of communication channels in order to do that. You know, you've got videos, we've got podcasts now, we've got, you know, blogs, we've got government briefings, you know, all sorts of things going on. And I find that a little bit overwhelming sometimes. So sometimes I have to self-regulate what I'm looking and listening to, you know, and so, you know, social media, for example, I spend maybe, you know, 5 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon, and 5 minutes in the evening. And for some reason, although I have to be quite quick at what I do now, it just regulates me a little bit more for myself. And it means that I'm, you know, easier to kind of regulate my emotions, I think, with others now, given that we're such, you know, close quarters. So I think generally it's actually going quite well. I mean, maybe we'll ask each other the same question in 3 months, but for now, those little strategies seem to help quite well.
Yeah, I think it's really encouraging to see how people take to new things, like you were saying about grandparents and technology and things. I've seen, I sit by my kitchen window when I'm doing my work, and I've been looking out today, and it's a lovely day, and I see a lot of people that are out for a jog, and I don't normally see that many people running around, and I think, you know, people are clearly sort of, I'm not allowed to go out, but I am allowed to go out once a day for exercise, so I'm going to do that then.
Yeah, I think so. And also I think generally people are being quite respectful of each other when they are going out. So, you know, I might be self-isolated, but my husband and my child aren't. So, you know, I get them out of the house to, you know, just go for a walk. But I think people are just, you know, making sure they keep a few meters apart, crossing the road, you know, just generally being very respectful, I think. So I'm pleased to see that for sure. But when it's a lovely day as well, you don't want to be just looking out the window, you want to be part of it. So I get into the garden, for example, when I need to. So, but then I'm lucky to have one. So, you know, when you don't, you're looking out the window is the next best thing, to be honest. I think it's really, I mean, I think I find it quite calming, I think, just to sort of feel like I'm kind of looking at something that's real rather than just, you know, something two-dimensional, you know, that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think when you're listening to the news, you almost get the feeling that it's some sort of post-apocalyptic future that we're living in. So when you actually look out the window, you see that there's no alien invasion, there's no, you know, things blowing up out there. It's actually a calm day with.
It's true. It does feel like a horror film sometimes, doesn't it? It's a bit really bad horror film too. But I do feel like, you know, we're all trying to keep our spirits up, and we're allowed to feel like, you know, sometimes we're not so great, because we have to remember also that although MSs are probably quite well equipped these days to look after, you know, we know change, trust me, like we've got change, we got it, you know, we're not, you know, experts or gurus in this, but we do know what change feels like, and we're flexible and we're resilient and all of those good things. But obviously, you know, for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people across the world, they're now realizing what it's like to be, you know, having to sacrifice certain things and to change their way of life and adapt, you know, strategize what they do every day, you know, just like an MSer, funnily enough. And, you know, and it's you know, it's like, oh, you know, welcome to my world. But at the same time, obviously, we have to have compassion, because this is, you know, this is a new situation in some senses for everybody, including us. So I think there's a little bit of, you know, actually, although I've experienced this before to a degree, and I can give tips and I can support and I can, you know, and I have been through social media, I think that there are some aspects to which, you know, this is all new for all of us, you know, and I'm learning too, you know, just like all of us MSs in the community. So, I think it's an interesting time for all of us, I feel like.
It is. And I think in some ways, if we're going to try and find the positives in this, that the fact that as an MS community, we are maybe used to life being quite unpredictable and strange, and this hunkering down and kind of getting on with things. So I guess we should see that as some sort of good thing to have in our backpack that other people might not have been able to deal with before.
It's definitely a skill, isn't it? And it's definitely something we can help other people with as well. I definitely recognize it in others around me. I can definitely see what they're feeling before they're kind of saying it aloud. So I'm like, okay, let's look at this and break down the issue and see what we can do about it. So it's kind of like, I think we can help guide others potentially.
Yeah. I think another thing that I've noticed in the MS community itself is the people that have maybe not before been called vulnerable, because people that are out there, they're working, they're not having to stay at home, and then suddenly now we've all got this big fat label of being vulnerable. How do you deal with that?
So it is. I mean, I guess we have to be classed as something to be able to protect us. I guess the government has to label us somehow. But it still feels quite raw when someone tells you you're vulnerable and you're still, you're quite mobile and you're quite, you don't have the fatigue that a lot of people have, and some of the issues that you see on the forums, etc. So and maybe you don't have that many relapses actually, or maybe you're just newly diagnosed and you're absolutely terrified now because you're suddenly classed as vulnerable. And I think also now it doesn't help that we have now this extra list of extremely vulnerable people. So there's like a new list of people. So, and all of this is extremely overwhelming because, the information isn't very clear all of the time. So it's, am I this or am I that? Where am I? And actually I don't feel any of that. Just like in the MS community, there are many of us who wouldn't call ourselves disabled. I mean, I do now, but it's taken me probably, I'd say 11, 12 years to get to that point where I say I'm disabled, but I'm still mobile. I'm still, that doesn't mean I'm not mobile and I'm not getting on with my life, etc. There are certain aspects that make me disabled. So in the same way, I think, people are feeling the same way about that word. I feel like, so it's a mind shift, I feel like. And I think the only way to really deal with it is to think to yourself, do I feel like it's a label and do I treat it seriously, or is it just part of what I am already and just accept it? And will it benefit me to be part of this group? And actually, I think for the majority of us, it really will. Eventually, if not now, it will. So I think we need to kind of have a bit of a reframing, if you like, of the word, perhaps in our own heads.
Yeah. And again, it's like I sort of said about it being a label, but I think it's actually there to protect us, isn't it? And it's there to help us. And I think I think a lot of people might just feel anxious because they're suddenly being, like you said, especially if you're newly diagnosed and you feel like you're kind of doing all right, but and then suddenly this happens and you think, well, what does that mean then? Am I, and I think it is just a word.
Yeah, it is just a word. Quite right. Yeah. It's just like any other word, isn't it? With the MS community, you're not, like people say secondary progressive. It's like, well, I was like that for a while before I was diagnosed with it. And that's kind of how it's just a label, basically. It's like, so everyone is just, everyone has different kind of approaches, but I really feel like it's just, we have to kind of commute it down to, what is the reason for the purpose for this word, I think we just need to not worry about it so much, about the word.
That's good. And then just keep on reading the advice and everything from the government and then just following that, because it's not just about protecting yourself, but protecting others, isn't it? So.
Right. Exactly right. But I can imagine if you're newly diagnosed, especially, and you're not used to this change, it can be quite terrifying. So all I would say to all our MSs is, we're here as a community, whatever part of that community we're in and whatever it looks like, whichever forum you're on or we're basically there for each other. So if we're having a wobble of any description, get online and start talking, basically, because, that's really the best kind of connections I've ever seen made are through just talking about these specific things.
Yeah, I think that's very true. But also in the way that social media can be a little bit unhelpful, that when you, because I'm working and trying to do the homeschooling and trying to, look after myself and all these things. And I find like, when you see lots of these posts about, oh, I'm doing this and I'm doing that and we've learned this and today we've done this, and then you just feel like, it's too much.
Yes, yeah.
Do you find that as well? Because you have a boy at home.
Primary school. He's now home. So yeah, I think that if you think about what it's like to try to do everything and trying to do it all, I think you just can't. And I think that's genuinely the advice I would say to give is just don't even try to do it all, because you're just not going to succeed. You're going to do yourself some harm by putting yourself these unrealistic expectations. Remember that we're not teachers, we're not qualified teachers. Well, most of us are not homeschooling our children every day. We work, we are colleagues, we are friends, we are family, we are we have even here when I'm not working, I'm doing other things, and now I can't do those things because I've got other people to look after and to do. So I would say that the key thing is not to try to do it all, and to as children they tend to be very resilient anyway. The school, I think, from my side has been great, and they're doing this this Google Classrooms thing, and I've got a whiteboard with his activities, they're in black and white, and a space in the dining room. But really, they like the structure, they like their routine in difficult times. So I'm trying my best to keep to those things. But if, he were to have a wobble, or, if he just wanted to do something different, I'm not going to stop him from doing that. I might encourage him to sort of keep to the timetable as much as possible, because as I said, they like the routine. But, there's also what we have to remember as MSs is also that, our children will feed off us. And again, that's something I think we're quite used to, actually. So already. So I think, hopefully we have a really good relationship and we're able to open, those doors and have those conversations with people. So, I'm being very open with my son about, what's going on. I'm being age appropriate about it. I don't tell him everything that goes on, but I just, if he sees it on the news, or if he if he just happens to be talking to, a friend and it comes up, that he's more not anxious or worried about it. Feed off us, I think. So if we're sort of panicked or we're worried, they're going to feed off about it. So off of it. So it's, I think, whilst I also don't find time to do everything that I used to do when no one was home, I now have to have it slightly rationed, but I still feel that that's quite important. So although I am now, kind of trying to get him educated at home and trying to keep a lid on some of the activities. The noise is one thing that drives me bonkers sometimes, because I do have hyperacusis. It's one of those things that I can't kind of, it's the low level stuff rather than the big kind of running around or whatever. It's the low level humming and the whatever else is going on. So, it's trying to deal with those things. But, like I said before, we're all trying to deal with new things. We're all learning. So I think it's just a case of being open about it and just talking it through as a family. And that's what you do.
And not put too much pressure on yourself when it comes to these things. Because I find last week I was kind of thinking, okay, so the kids are in school from 9 to 3. Let's do a schedule for that. Right. But then somebody posted something on Facebook that really made me think, which was about how much schooling does a kid need? Because you're thinking about classes of 30 children or being in school for so long, because the teacher goes around, helps all the different kids. But if you just have one or two at home, then obviously they don't need to be sitting from 9 till 3.
They don't. No. And actually we had a message from our school saying that, we don't expect the children to be sitting between 9 and 3, which is really helpful, because that really kind of, I think, allayed a lot of the fears that people had. But I think, again, we don't want our children sitting from 9 till 3 either, because they're going to hurt themselves, not used to be sitting at a computer or at a desk for that length of time. So it's really important for them to get their exercise and to get up, just avoid the cramping, basically, you know, just try and get out and do kid stuff, you know.
And you can do a lot of practical things. So we've been doing things like cooking, and then you get a bit of reading in there because they read the recipes, and then you get a bit of maths, working out things.
Yeah.
So I think practical things is brilliant.
I think so. I agree with you. And remember also that we always complain that we never have enough time with our families, and here we are with this great, you know, time to spend with our children, and they can learn some life skills along the way, which is really helpful. So and you just get a little bit closer, which is lovely. So the whole sort of, you know, the bonding with your kids is vital, really. And when eventually this thing is over and done with, we'll think, oh, I'm sure we'll be like, in some senses, we'll be like, thank God you go back to school. But in other times, you'll be thinking, oh, I really miss him. Like now I'm like, oh, I'm cooking alone here. What's going on, you know? So make the most of it, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the whole closeness of having your family close by when it is difficult. It's my 6-year-old. He'll just come and give me a hug now and again, and I find that's I get very jealous sometimes when I see people with their pets, you know, dogs and things like that. But I have a very cuddly 6-year-old instead.
I know. I do sort of think, oh, you know, I wish I could go out now and get a kitten or something. But I'm like, I missed my opportunity now. But I've got, you know, a little boy here who's great at this sort of stuff. So no, I'll miss the cuddles when he goes back to school. But I think it's we do have to kind of I think it's this thing about kind of finding your joy and being grateful for the small things. And I think this is. There's the small moments that you have throughout the day that you just really latch onto. So sometimes I find when he's gone to bed and I find myself laughing and sort of things that he's done or said during the day, and I think, oh yeah, I wouldn't have had that if we wouldn't have been off school. So I think there are things sometimes. I know it's a difficult situation for everybody, but I do feel like there are times where you just have to reflect a little bit and think, actually, do you know what? I've had a really good day, you know, largely because of this happening.
Yeah, it's the finding the tidbits of positivity that actually keeps you going through this very confusing times.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Have you got any other kind of tips, any good things that you have kind of come across about dealing with? I don't know. We've got so many strange things like the shops and I don't know.
I think if one of the things I would say, and I know it's quite frustrating because everyone's doing it at the moment, is if you haven't done it already, is if you have a particular shop that you like to shop with, and obviously it'll be online deliveries now for most of us, or many of us. I think, you know, just make sure that they know that you're, you know, classed as vulnerable, if that makes sense, so that, you know, you are able to be prioritized in your online deliveries, because it's so difficult to find a slot. So that would be, you know, and I think you have to persevere. I think I called Sainsbury's about 500 times the other day, and that's not a joke. It's nearly 500 times. But I think, you know, finally I got through and we've got a delivery in place. So I think it's, you know, it's making sure that you feel like you've got kind of the practical stuff sorted as well. And I think, you know, we were saying, you know, we are going to go through a long period of change, but, you know, emotion doesn't care about the blitz spirit. You know, it kind of buries itself, doesn't it, in the recesses of your mind, and eventually it will resurface, if, you know, in ways that you didn't expect. So it's okay to have you know, issues with what's going on. You know, you don't always have to have this positivity. It's okay to have a moment, shall we say, a wobble or two along the way, and to be open around, you know, with those around you, so that, you know, if you have concerns and needs, particularly if something's bothering you, you have to be open about it, because it will cause issues down the line. And also just, you know, pace yourself. You know, we've got a few months of this, right? So it's just, you know, everyone's kind of going out and getting, you know, their latest kind of language app and all this, and it's okay, you know, just relax, you know, just try and you know, just do one thing at a time, and otherwise you'll end up kind of trying to do too much, actually, and it sometimes, I think, backfires a little bit. So I think, you know, just try and slow down. I mean, I practice mindfulness. It does force me to slow down, though I have to physically make myself go and do it, because otherwise I'll be thinking, well, how come why don't I, I haven't got time for all this. I've got to, do this and do that and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I think it's about just taking that time for yourself is really important.
I agree with that. Yesterday I felt quite overwhelmed after trying to argue with the kids about something. After doing the work and trying to wrestle with technology. So I just, I said to my husband, look, I just need a little time. So I grabbed myself a bag of crisps and went and sat and watched Sabrina the Teenage Witch in front of Netflix and felt like I was 15 years old again. And actually, regression was quite nice.
I think, you know what, we like I said, to someone the other day, I think it's, whatever you need to do to kind of have some space, you do. And I know sometimes space is limited, both physically and kind of the time frames we have for ourselves, especially with the kids. But I do feel like that time away kind of allows you to recenter, refocus, just get your head back to where you want it to be, so that when those arguments do occur, you're a little bit more equipped to deal with them, and it won't bother you so much. And I think sometimes we don't put ourselves first. And I think I always come back to this thing that I was taught in first aid, many, many years ago, that, if you don't look after yourself, you're not going to be able to look after others. So, I really feel like if you don't look after yourself and your kind of well-being in this environment, whether it's physical or mental, doesn't matter, you have to be able to look after yourself. And if you don't put yourself first, you will come across, further down the line. So if we're in this for a long time, as it looks like we might be, we just want to be able to put certain interventions in place now, so that we don't get to the point where we really are tearing our hair out. So I really feel like perhaps, although we are more equipped to deal with this, I think, as MSs, because we're used to change, it's about kind of trying to, deal with what is a fast changing situation. And, getting our information maybe just from one or two places, rather than relying on social media to tell us everything, probably erroneously anyway. So just, listen to the experts and, implement what we've got to implement, and really just give yourself a break. That literally is all we can do. We can't do any more. So, I think it's really, for me, just reminding myself of that when I find myself going down, a path of, oh my gosh, I've got so much to do and I've got so much to, so much pressure to do it, that actually we have a bit of fun along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very, very good advice. And as for looking for information, the MS Trust website, I'm putting on new things all the time as soon as they come up. Yeah. So we try and we update our A to Z. So we're really trying, because that's the fear now, that, more and more people are starting to share strange information and that sort of stuff. So really make sure that if you heard anything that isn't from the government website, the NHS, or, one of the bigger charities, just fact check everything.
Right. I think that's and I'm starting to challenge that a little bit as well. So, where did you get this source from? And have you thought of this? And, just trying to, just be a little bit more mindful, because I think that when people are afraid or vulnerable themselves, they are more open to this kind of fear mongering, I feel like, and we need to be a little bit careful with that. So I agree. If we can look at one or two sources of information only, it kind of, and official sources of information, it kind of reduces the stress anyway.
That's that sounds really good. And speaking of writing, we'll look out for some new posts on your blog then.
Thank you. Yes, my MS Bully Me. I am going to try and get through the next few months writing as much as I can. So I'll publish more and more, I think, over time. And feel free also to come and see me on Twitter, Carla K Coach. I'll be around there as well.
Excellent. Well, we'll keep on chatting with you, and thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you, Helena. Thank you for inviting me, and I really hope everyone stays well and looks after each other.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye now.
So there was lots of good stuff there, some really good answers to questions from Claire. So we really hope you found that useful.
Yeah, the info team is doing a really grand job of trying to get all that information out there and up to date. And as you mentioned to the start of this, everything is just changing so quickly.
It really is. And I also thought what Carla was saying was really interesting about self-regulating, not overindulging on news and social media. Don't swipe all the time. We hear this a lot, and I think it's something that we all need to take into consideration, some time out from that constant bombarding of information that we get.
Yeah. And I thought it was also particularly interesting what she was saying about that people with MS might actually be better at dealing with this situation, because so many of us are actually used to being indoors a lot and sort of hunkering down and getting on with it. Listen to your body, adapting to change, and trying to ignore the unhelpful advice and comments that might be upsetting to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think social media can be a great thing at times, but I think it's both a blessing and a curse.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, the MS Trust is out there on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. So, and all our information is researched and evidence-based. So if you are surfing around on social media feeds, do people even say surfing around anymore, or am I showing my age here?
I like surfing. It's a little bit retro, but I like it.
But we're out there anyway, so give us a follow.
And you can also contact our inquiry service. So we're all working from home at the moment, so it would be best to contact us by email, and the email address is ask@mstrust.org.uk. You can give us a call and leave a message, and then someone will get back to you. And the number to ring is 0800 032 3839. The team are amazing. They're super friendly and they've got so much knowledge.
And I hope this podcast was useful for you. And we'll be back when we got more to say on this topic.
Stay safe, everyone.
And also, before we go, can we just say a big thank you to Claire and to Carla for talking to us. And also a big thank you to the Major for the music. Bye.
Bye.